Again, bang.
Okay.
It's called to order the Village of Hinsdale special meeting for November 30th, 2021. Please stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we have no minutes to approve, nothing for the President's report, no citizens here to petition the board. And so this meeting is largely to go over the proposed budget. We do have one item though, right? That's the, let's go, who's got 6A?
I've got it,
Yeah.
yeah. So item 6A is first read to change the start time of our regular board meetings from 7:30 p.m. to 7 p.m., still on Tuesdays. Staff has surveyed members of the board, and the general sense is that people want to start a little bit earlier so we can end a little bit earlier. I think in part driven by the fact that a lot more people are, but not everyone is working from home as opposed to commuting to and from the city. And because this is a public meeting, the time and date of the meeting are a matter of statute, so that's something that we need to formally amend. I don't know if anybody has further thoughts. People are generally on board with this, the 7 p.m.
I'm fine with that. Could we have meetings at the same time, though? I looked at the agenda like 5 times a day, make sure it was 6:30 and not, just saying.
Oh, you mean for this meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't know why today's was at 6:30.
Yeah.
I mean, my thought was, because some people talked about moving all the meetings to 6:30, and I thought, well, we've been having a lot of meetings before.
Right.
And then if you start having, the regular start time at 6:30 and you have a meeting before, does that start at 5:30? That just seemed, like going before 6 seemed a little too early,
Yep.
I agree.
so,
Everybody okay with 7?
Yep.
Okay.
all right. Consent agenda for
Yep.
that.
And you're gonna talk about the budget?
Yeah, I'll say a few words about it. The main purpose of the special meeting is item 6B to go over the 2022 budget. As you can see, this is a pretty voluminous packet, but actually there's a lot of elements of it that should be familiar to us because we've already talked about them and approved them. So the capital improvement plan, the master infrastructure plan, revenue assumptions, property tax levy, those are all components of this budget that we've already talked about. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about tonight are already familiar to you, but staff is going to give a little PowerPoint presentation. So Andrea, do you want to, or Kathleen, do you want to?
Thank you. I first want to make sure that I thank everyone who had a hand in putting this together. And so thank you to Andrea, Allison, Trevor. Where's Trevor? Right there. And also Chris Bruton and other clerical staff. It really is, Karen helped and people outside their role to help get this document delivered to you. So wanted to thank them. And we're going to follow the same format that we did last year. We'll just review the draft budget, talk about the highlights, and please feel free to ask any questions where appropriate. If you read in the village manager's transmittal letter, that's a good summary as to the key elements. We'll have that posted online after this meeting. We do note that we were anticipating a retirement in the police department. That person's last day, I believe, was yesterday. So we will be updating the budget to reflect that, and so it touches various pieces. So I will also ask that you leave your binder with us so we can update it before the next board meeting and then do the insertions instead of sending it to you. We'll put it on color-coded paper so you can know which pages we've changed, and with that, I think we'll start.
So first, we just want to do a high-level overview of the projected general fund operating results for 2021.
This is located. It's a summary. It's on page 3 in your binder.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Where she's pulling the numbers
Yes.
from.
This will come from Schedule 3, which is in page 3 of the binder. Thank you. The village began 2021 with a general fund reserve of just over $6 million, which is 34.1% of the operating expenses, so over the 25% target. As of December 31st of 2021, the general fund includes reinstated transfers to the capital fund to the pre-pandemic amount. The budget was $625,000, and that was moved back up to $1.25 million in the projections. There's also an additional $200,000 added to the MIP transfer due to the positive budget performance in 2021. The general fund is projected to have an ending fund balance of $5.9 million at the end of this year, which is a 32.9% reserve. And in 2021, the total ending general fund balance, including the capital reserve, is 43.68%. So again, just at a high level, that we're easily meeting that 25% target.
Andrea, do we have
Yes.
to have like a formal approval of the movement of those two additional amounts to the CIP and MIP? The 625 and the
So-
200?
Those are, that's a great question. So those are included in the projection amounts, and what our plan was to come back to the board after the first of the year when all of the numbers, when our pre-audit numbers are final and known, just to make sure that we hit all of the targets that we expected. Then we will come with a recommendation that would need approval from the board. And that's also when we might discuss any additional discretionary transfers with excess fund balance above that 25% target.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's an annual exercise. I believe that last year it wasn't done just because we were still in the pandemic and there were still so many unknowns. But historically, that should be an annual exercise. So 2022, the 2022 budget general fund revenue is displayed on the next slide. It shows that the total revenues for 2022 are $21.4 million. As you can see, property taxes make up the largest section of that, at just over $8 million, which is 37.6% of revenues, followed by sales and use tax, which is just over $4 million, and that's 19% of the total revenue. Property tax, sales tax, and income tax and utility tax combined make up 74% of the total general fund revenues.
And the numbers that are presented are consistent with the discussion that occurred in September regarding the revenue setting, with the exception of adjustments were made to the utility tax and the permit revenue. The utility tax, we made it flat from this year to next year, based on what's going on with the cost of gas, electricity, and those types of things. We expect the growth to at least bring it into line with the 2021 budget. And on the permits, with respect to the number that we discussed at the meeting in September, we didn't factor in the annual adjustment that's done with CPI on the expenses, so that would account for us expecting no growth over this year's budget.
So one editorial comment on this page. You know, while almost 40% of the village's revenue comes from property tax, we only get 7% of the property tax. And I think that's important for residents to know, because I often get asked, you know, why are our property taxes so high? 80% of the property tax goes to the school districts, the high school and the grade school districts. We get 7%, and College of DuPage gets 4%, and then I think that the library gets 4%. But we are not a substantial taker of property tax, although it does constitute about 40% of our budget.
That's a great point. There's actually, I just bumped ahead to slide 6, and there is a dollar bill that demonstrates that, just like you said, 7% of the total tax bill goes to the village of Hinsdale. The predominant portion goes to the schools. Okay, so then going back to slide 5, this is just a snapshot of key revenues, so you can see a visual comparison of where the 2020 actuals, 2021 budget, our projection, and the 2022 budget are for each of these key items. Most of these are general fund revenues, but then at the end there's also the motor fuel tax and the non-home rule sales tax, which goes to the MIP fund.
And the utility tax also, a portion of it, that's split between the general fund and the MIP. And highlighted with the yellow stars are those that are combined to be the state, local, federal tax distribution on your Schedule 2. And the blue ones are noted as other revenue. And that's just to make a distinction. I know we've had questions in the past as to which ones collapse into those categories. We noted in the manager's transmittal letter that ambulance fees, parking permit fees, and meter fees, they're all down still, but we have seen some rebounding of those in the third quarter, and we'll be doing the mailing for the new commuter permits, and with the mandates to return back to the office starting in January, we're hopeful, for many places, we're hopeful to see that the commuter revenue will return. As of right now, with respect to the commuter lots, we were at a low at the beginning of this year at 7%, and now we're up to 60% in sales. So though the parking lot may appear to be empty, we're selling the permits. And similarly with the merchant permits, which we also saw a decline at 13% earlier this year, it was up to 37% by October.
Jumping back to slide 6 with property taxes, again, the levy has already been passed by the board. Just want to point out that of the levy, 73.5% goes to police and fire protection. So that's predominantly where the property tax dollars go to. This is just a snapshot of the revenue setting decision table from the meeting that we had in September for your reference. The next few slides just have some more detail on a few of the revenue items. The first item is income tax. There is some statistical data showing that in July 2017, the income tax rates were increased. If you look at the bar graph to the right, you'll see that the 2021 estimate is pretty far above the 2021 budget. This is due to unprecedented corporate income tax levels that have occurred. A big contributor to this was the closure of a corporate tax loophole, and just in general, the corporate income tax returns were far above and continue to be far above all of the earlier predictions. And that trend has actually continued. So the 2022 revenue budget is slightly down from our projection, and that is a conservative amount. And feel free to stop with any questions as we go through this. Yes?
Yeah, just a quick question. So I'm looking at places for eating. It looks like we're saying we're going to have flat 390,000, 390,000, although because we have the Oasis closure. How much was the Oasis contributing to that? Just
I did an analysis on that, and I apologize, I don't have the figures in front of me.
okay. I didn't know if it was a
You're
major.
talking about sales tax?
Yeah. Is that what we're looking
Isn't it
at?
like 500,000?
It was originally 500,000 if you included the regular sales tax that goes to the general fund, the non-home rule sales tax, and the places for eating tax. But those were pre-pandemic figures. So when
This is just eating, so it's not gasoline or anything like that.
right.
And
I was just wondering how much.
How long have those restaurants been closed in the Oasis?
Since September.
Yeah, and the 500,000 included revenue from the 7-Elevens on both sides, which are not closing. Yeah. So the trend of revenue has gone down pretty significantly since the pandemic. So the actual impact that we are going to see in 2022 from where we're at in 2021 isn't nearly as significant as what was projected back pre-pandemic.
So refresh my recollection, for all said that the sales tax from the Oasis was what, 500,000?
About 550,
550, so half of that's gas.
yes.
So about
it's almost
250 to
50-50.
300 would be food and beverage. And then some significant portion of that is the 7-Elevens or whatever they are on both sides that have not been shut down. So we're talking about that, there's a delta there, but I'm not sure what the delta is. So somewhere under $100,000, I would think. Yeah, and I was in the overpass recently or before it shut down. It wasn't well-traveled. And I don't think they were getting much business there. I think because they knew they were shutting down, they hadn't done much to improve it, and I don't think many people were using it.
Yeah, it's correct. A lot of the restaurants closed prior to September.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, our outdoor dining program for next year could just shatter all those
Yeah, and you know,
assumptions.
one of the things that we,
Well, better than a 7-Eleven.
what we do with this is we try to keep it realistic, but on the conservative side of realism. I mean, I think between Matt and I, we've knocked these numbers down significantly over time. Not to make them unrealistically conservative, but just conservative. And I feel confident that if anybody finds one number in here that they think is aggressive, it's offset by many, many numbers that are probably on the conservative side.
Sure.
I'd be happy to follow up with more detail on those revenue figures. And we did from the original projection, we actually backed it down further just to make sure we were conservative. And we broke out the revenue forecast by the OASIS versus online sales tax versus the base sales tax, and then any other anomalies. So we broke all of the sales tax figures down into buckets when we analyzed it.
But you will look into that. Yeah, okay.
Okay, then next slide with sales and local use tax. Again, if you look at the bar chart to the right, you can see that the 2021 budget was 3.37 million, and the 2021 estimate is 4.24 million. That is due to the predominantly due to the Leveling the Playing Field Act and the impact of the sales tax now generating from the place of purchase versus the online sales tax or the business. So this change has been very profitable for Hinsdale due to the volume of online shopping that's occurring. There's Amazon and DoorDash and Grubhub, and all of those are now showing up on our sales tax returns. Let's see, the impact of COVID was not nearly as severe as a lot of people had projected. And again, it's the combination of sales and local use tax. We talked about this in the revenue setting decision table. They thought, some of the economists thought that the use tax was going to drop far more than it has. And they're not sure if that is just an adjustment period. So they've cautioned against using 2021 as a basis for what future revenues are going to be. So again, that's why the 2022 figures are very conservative.
And last week, Allison, Andrea, and I were on a training session with the Department of Revenue where they're looking at it. So what we're experiencing in Hinsdale, every municipality is experiencing throughout the state of Illinois, this increase.
The next slide has utility tax. As a reminder, there are 4 utility tax sources: electric, gas, telephone, and water. And while the telephone tax, the trend for that to decrease has continued, the electric and gas prices going up will result in higher revenues. And the overall projection is flat because we do feel like the increase in the gas and electric is going to offset the decrease that we expect to see in the telephone tax. Permits, just like the utilities, we are projecting a flat budget from 2021 to 2022. The permit growth has been, or the permit revenue has been steady historically.
Did you say, you said for permits though, you're increasing it by CPI?
Right. The building permits, we have our code provides that we do an adjustment, a CPI adjustment. And the reason we made them flat from the revenue projection setting meeting is that when we met in September, we hadn't made the adjustment to apply that CPI to it.
So what is in the budget is up slightly from the revenue projection or the revenue setting decision table to incorporate the CPI increase to the rates. Okay, that wraps up general fund revenue. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to field those, and if not, we'll move into the general fund expenses. The first pie chart shows the general fund expenses by department. This also coordinates with the Schedule 2, which is page 2 in your budget binder. Overall expenses are $18.4 million in 2022. The breakdown by amount and percentage is listed on the chart. And the next slide has a key expense summary. Again, just shows you the trend for the different categories. So you can see 2020 actuals compared to the 2021 budget, the projection, and the 2022 budget. The next slide shows the same general fund expense of $18.4 million, but this has a breakdown by category as opposed to department, and that shows the breakdown by dollar amount and by percentage. As mentioned before, there is a very recent retirement. We weren't able to incorporate it into this budget document, so that will decrease that employee salary number, and we'll get those updated pages to you in advance of the next meeting. Personnel and benefits are demonstrated here. Again, that makes up the largest portion of the expenditure budget. It includes salaries, wages, and overtime. There is an annual wage adjustment and plus movement through different pay scales that are incorporated into the budget amount. The total cost of $9.06 million is an increase of 5.6%. But again, with that adjustment due to the retirement, which will offset a temporary overhire that the board had approved earlier this year, that's going to go down to 4.27%.
And we've had some challenges both last year and this year with the impact of COVID on our workforce, meaning in the police and fire departments when you have to quarantine people or hire people back. And then additionally, some of the numbers in the police department, the overtime may be a little bit higher due to some extra activity that the police department has in light of recent crime events and things like that. So it's one big number, and if we had it extrapolated out a little bit better between wages and overtime, you'd actually see what the impact is. So it's all collapsed at once. And you see it in our estimated actual on your schedule. That the number also is a little bit higher. We've had some long-term employees retire, and with that, we have payouts of their vacation balances and things like that, and they are significant, and we don't typically budget for that because we don't predict who's going to leave. And there's 3 people, and one from fire, one from police, and then the finance director that retired in February of 2021 that had substantial dollar amounts that we paid out.
So why don't we budget for that?
Because we don't know who's necessarily leaving in any given year. I mean, we could start setting aside maybe $40,000 each year to do that. And many times you don't really see the impact of it because we have turnover, and so we have salary savings that offset it, so it's negligible.
Okay.
And we just aren't going to be seeing that. If you recall, we've had a lot of people retire in the police department. So now I think we're at a point with yesterday's retirement that we won't have many in the next couple of years. The people that might leave might be the younger people moving on to another department, and that's negligible. And similarly in the fire department with the most recent retirement, I think the only retirement eligible person right now is sitting at the table
Sitting at the
down there. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
The next slide, it wraps up the general fund. It just has bullet points on several budget items of interest. Again, we covered that the 2022 budget includes a transfer of $1.92 million to the MIP fund. That's back to the pre-pandemic level. There are grants in the budget totaling $825,000, which are the grant dollars are tied to specific projects. Transfer to the capital reserve of $1.25 million. There's a contingency line item in the budget, dollars for tollway lobbying. The material and supply expenses in the budget are higher in 2022 than we've seen in recent years. One of the driving factors of that is the increase for the cost of road salt. Also, fuel costs have gone up significantly over the last year. And just commodity prices in general have increased. Repairs and maintenance expenses are also budgeted higher in 2022 due to deferred projects. Again, just due to the uncertainties of the pandemic, there were some maintenance items that were deferred until we knew we were on more solid ground. So there's a little bit of catch up that's happening in there.
And next year, we are bidding out our landscape contract, and so there's an expectation that we won't receive as favorable rates as we've had in previous years due to all the things we've mentioned, gas, oil, cost of people. And we've also increased our parking deck maintenance to better reflect what we think the expenses are. We modeled that at the cost of what LaGrange uses just as an estimate. And we also this year took the opportunity to consolidate it all in one line item. It was previously spread out amongst multiple, so we want to get a better gauge on actually how much we're spending on the parking deck.
So that brings us to the bottom line.
Oh, wait, one other item. In other expenses, you will note that there's an increase in that area, that as well. The bulk of that expense is associated with allocating $30,000 for the incentives for historic preservation.
Great. So then to the bottom line for the 2022 budget, we project an ending general fund balance of $5.48 million, which is equal to 29.8% of budgeted operating expenses, which is above the 25% target. And that includes the forecast in 2021 and 2022 being, the transfers to the MIP and the capital fund going back to those pre-pandemic levels. So we can do that and still meet and exceed the budget target. And the total fund balance, including the capital reserve, would be $6.86 million, which is 32.75% of budgeted operating expenses.
And it's been the philosophy of the board, at least since I've been here, to have that reserve balance at 25%. And we're still cognizant of that. But we'd like to leave it at the status quo right now of 29% to see what, like we did this year, what the first quarter results are, and then we can make additional transfers to the MIP or use it in other ways if it's determined to be a good decision at that time.
Yeah, so the thinking is, we only get credit for 25% reserve. That's all we need to have a AAA bond rating. And we've drifted up over the years. I think last year I was not concerned about drifting up because we didn't know where we were going to end up this year with the COVID. But it seems to me that at some point, maybe halfway through the year, if we're trending on budget or favorable to budget, we take a look at the reserve balance and see if we can deploy some of those monies to some use and try to get the ending balance to 25%. But since this is more art than science, at this point being, let's see, about almost 5% above, which would be what, about, what is that, about?
$800,000.
$250,000 or something like that?
I think it was $800,000.
Okay, $800,000. But if we get closer to the middle of the year, we can talk about that.
Yes.
But I don't see any reason doing that now. Because we've got a reserve on top of a reserve, plus we've got a contingency, so we're pretty set. But if it comes June or July and we're trending favorable budget, and we're still in this COVID thing to some extent, so who knows where this is going to end up. So we can talk about what we do with that $800,000, because I don't want to end with a like a 35% ending balance if we only need 25 to satisfy the rating agencies.
How much leeway do the rating agencies give you? Like if you drop down to 23%?
Well, I think for what I asked that question, I think that they have some forgiveness. 25% is their target, and if you drop a little bit below and you've got a plan to come back, then you don't lose your rating. We certainly don't want to lose our bond rating, because if we borrow money, as you know, it's very important. But it seems to me that it makes everybody feel good to have a 35% reserve. But the problem is it's just money that's just sitting there that can be used. Right. It's not earning anything, and we can use it to fix roads or do something with it. So But again, I think that prudent management suggests that we try to fine tune the reserve towards the middle of the year.
And with that, unless there are any final questions on the general fund, we'll wrap that up and move into the capital improvement plan. The capital improvement plan already came before you. It was discussed and approved. The main thing with this is we just want to remind you that it is a plan and a guide, and it's a working document. So staff is continually monitoring prices, getting quotes, and updating the plan and the figures in the plan to keep it as current as possible. There have been some minor changes to the plan from what was approved a few months ago, but there's nothing material. So this is just updated figures to represent some new estimates.
And an example of that is I have a memo that I received from Public Works. There's some potentially supply chain issues with things that we have programmed in 2023 and perhaps advance funding that in 2022. That'll be something we'll bring to the board, but we continually look at these things, and the numbers could change a bit.
Anything in 2022 that's been revised?
We did make a change. We removed the hydrant painting from the general fund CIP and moved that into the water fund where we think it belongs. And then there was the tot lot. Is it, or did that not?
I don't remember
No,
that. on the
Irma
top left.
Butler. Wasn't there a
Oh,
change?
a deferral. Again, some projects that, just since the CIP was presented to the board, the timing has been adjusted. I think that we may have assumed when, that the pool would be completed, the pool renovation would be completed this calendar year, and that's actually not going to be completed until next year. So some things are just timing issues as to when it was going to be done. But again, there's nothing material that has changed in it. It's just fine tuning and some timing.
Do we expect any delay in the pool opening?
No, I don't expect any delays. Again, it was just thinking that it might be done this year and it'll be next spring, but before pool season.
Thank you.
The next page just, again, has a reminder with some bullet points of items that we have already reviewed. Also, for your review, there was the exercise that staff went through with prioritization for projects in 2022 and 23. So there's the must-have, the nice to have, and with that, we can move into the water and sewer fund. So starting with the water and sewer fund is made up of 3 sub-funds. There's the water operations fund, the water capital fund, and then the water and sewer debt service fund. So the first slide is just for water operations, and it shows that for 2022, revenues are forecast to be $9.6 million and expenditures at $8.3 million. There's a transfer made to debt service. So the 2022 budget includes a surplus, which would bring the ending fund balance to just over $3 million, which is right around 25%. That's a pretty solid place to be for fund balance for the water fund. There are, $8.66 million in residential water charges, $921,000 in sewer charges, and that incorporates the new tiered water rates that were passed in September of 2021.
And what, it's nice that we're reporting that we have a reserve balance of 25% in the operations and maintenance fund of the water fund. Prior to, in 2020, our actual, we were at 9%. So that's good. That's something that it had been commented on by the rating agencies to have reserve balances for all of the funds. We thought we could start moving there incrementally.
Okay. From there, there's a chart showing the water purchased from the DuPage County Water Commission. This is total water purchased, not just the water sold. So there's the revenue water that we sell to customers, and then the non-revenue water for municipal operations, and then normal usage for, fire hydrant flushing, things like that. And there, with the improvements to the water infrastructure that the village has been investing in, we may start to see a result in the decline of non-revenue water, so we are monitoring that.
So a question that's a little off topic, but I remember several years ago, we determined we had a problem with water we were buying that we weren't able to sell because we thought it was leaking into the ground. And we thought it could be as much as 10% of the water that we bought was just going into the ground and not being sold to residents. By replacing a lot of water mains, if we got a handle on that issue, or are we still losing some of the water we buy as a village into the ground and we're not charging residents for it?
Well, I think one of the things that we're fine tuning is capturing the water that we have a known use for. For
Right.
instance, if we quantify how many fire hydrants we flush every year, and the water that's related to that, and with municipal operations, with water main, like known water main breaks, there's some water loss there.
Right.
So that gets the number of
Yeah, but I thought there was
unaccounted for
like
water down.
existing water lines that were weakened, and there was water constantly going into the ground. And I remember hearing, this is
Correct.
maybe 5 or 6 years ago, as much as 10%, because I mean, so we're buying water and we're selling it. And if we lose 10% in the ground, that's an issue. I just wonder if we think we're getting a handle on that.
We are still losing water.
Okay.
That is one of the reasons that in future years, we have the upcoming water main replacement program of $500,000 every year, so that we can start bringing that number down. George?
Right, so what we try to do is we try to track main breaks. So we've seen a decline in the number of main breaks that we're having annually as we put more money into our mains. So as we can reduce that number of main breaks in the system, then the system is tighter in the sense that we're not losing water down the drain or money down the drain.
Is there this, again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but is there some service you could employ or something that would go look at our system and see where we're losing water?
We do an
Some-
annual leak detection survey.
Yeah.
So a company will come in, and what they'll do is they'll detect the whole system. They sound it out with acoustics.
Right.
And then they're able to pinpoint areas where we've got leaks that are not surfacing, that may be going into the sewer. So as those are identified, then Public Works digs them up and fixes them.
Okay, okay. So
and
you're doing that now?
We do that every
Okay,
year,
okay,
correct.
okay. All right.
Have we ever tried to do a water balance, like this is how much we bought, this is how much we sold, and, taking into account
Yeah.
flushes and things like
We
that?
have like through our,
You do like a mass balance.
there's like a water audit that we have to submit to the state every year, which basically looks at our billable versus non-billable water. And I believe we're somewhere in the 75-80% range in what we're billing for what we're buying, I believe, something around that.
And some
Number.
fraction of that is our own use.
Some of
right?
it's lost water to the age
And
of the
some of
mains.
it's lost
Some of
water.
it's municipal, like the pool.
Right.
They don't like, the state has these rules that we can argue with them about, which are questionable in my mind. Like the pool, for example, that doesn't count as part of our water usage with the state for some bizarre reason. So we use water there, but we don't necessarily get credit for it through the IDNR. And we don't bill ourselves for that, so that's essentially water that we're not billing.
Yeah.
And then there's the water main breaks. Those are probably the two biggest ones. And then there's hydrant flushing, and then there's some other miscellaneous small stuff like sewer cleaning and
But
street
25% isn't getting sold then.
Right.
That's a lot of water.
It is.
But I mean, granted that there's.
And it's always been something that kind of bugged me, that, we're buying water and it's going into the ground. But I was hopeful that as we place more water mains, that we would determine that this problem's been rectified. But it's 20,
We
that's
we have a master list of water mains where we know we're losing water
yeah.
with them in terms of breaks and just old main. So as we get through the capital and through the planning, these are areas that we want to pick up through our capital or infrastructure program.
Okay. Something we should do whatever we can to
Right,
fix it.
right.
I
And,
agree.
and we'll be interested to see what this big improvement will do, because that was a very old water main that we replaced, and it'll be interesting to see what the numbers are next year.
Right.
But we have been reducing our water loss. It's just not as significant as we would like.
Okay.
Correct.
The, let's see, the chart on the screen in front of you shows water purchased. There was a dip in 2019. That has gone up over the last 2 years, but just to demonstrate how variable it is. And again, this goes to why we had implemented the fixed fee and the tiered rates, because we did need a steady source of revenue to offset the volatility when 75% of the purchased water is billed, 25% isn't. So that's a large variable in revenue that comes in each year dependent on fluctuation, and a lot of that's weather dependent. Just a couple bullet points, most of which we have already gone over. With that, we go to the next water and sewer fund, which is the capital fund. The revenues in the 2022 budget of $540,000 are from the new fixed infrastructure fee. That is a conservative estimate, but that's based on what we're seeing right now. Expenditures for next year are $340,000, and that's $300,000 of water main work and then $40,000 of sewer work, as outlined in the capital improvement plan. Just of note that in 2021, there was a transfer budgeted from the Water Operations Fund in order to establish and start building fund balance in the Water Operations Fund. And due to the positive performance of the general fund, one of the recommendations we had was to make that transfer from the general fund as opposed to the Water Operations Fund. Again, that's just a projection. We'll come back to the board later in the year with the final actual recommendation and request. Also note that the transfer from the MIP has been $1.65 million in the past. That drops down to $500,000. And that still allows an ending fund balance in 2022 of $1.374 million, which is going to be used for additional projects that are coming up in 2023 and 2024. So we did project that out 5 years to make sure that we're going to have adequate revenue to cover all of the planned projects. Let's see, water and sewer fund, all fund summary. This just demonstrates the combined fund balance of all three funds. Shows the revenues and expenditures, what the combined transfers are, and the ending fund balance of $4.3 million for the three funds.
Is there any reason we couldn't accelerate some of the water main projects? I mean, we were just talking about,
Water.
using,
Lost water.
we just talked about, fixing water mains, and the 340 number for 2022 is pretty low, right?
Some of our oldest roads are, and
Yeah, you
we've
gotta
got
do
brick
that in
roads
conjunction
that
with
are
roads.
100 years
That's the-
old, that have utilities that are 100 years old under them. So if we really want to maximize roads and attack some of these utilities, we could look at some of these older brick roads too as well.
And we're redoing the MIP, right, starting in 2025, so that's certainly something that we can do. We can also talk about next year at the start, next year, and see what our position is, our revenue position. We'd like to have a little bit more experience with the water rate changes, but we could implement things. But to George's point, we have to do them in tandem many times, so we'll have to look at that. But there is an opportunity, as it's shown on your Schedule 3, where you see the $1.2 million of ARPA funds coming in to the general fund and then going out to the MIP. And those specifically have an allowable use of water improvements, so that is something we're thinking about. The reason we didn't make any recommendations on that is we're still waiting for final guidance from the Treasury Department to see how those funds may be spent, because there could be something more important to the village than the water improvements, and we just want to make sure that we don't make any hasty decisions. Anything to add?
Okay, moving on to the MIP. Again, the MIP is a plan, and there are 3 different funds that make up the activity in the MIP, with that being the motor fuel tax fund, the actual MIP capital fund, and the water capital fund. So just wanted to demonstrate for 2022 the combined revenue for those 3 funds. The total, if you look at the bottom right, is $8.45 million of revenue that's feeding into that plan for this year. About $1 million is coming from the motor fuel tax, and there is the third line under motor fuel tax is Motor Fuel Tax Build Illinois. That was a 3-year funding for 2020, 21, and 22. So 2022 is the last year we're going to get that $369,000. There are transfers into the MIP from the general fund. There's the non-home rule sales tax, grants of $906,000, and that's expected in STP funding, which is for the Garfield Street project. And then the water capital has the infrastructure and maintenance fee. The next slide shows the MIP project expenditures that are included in the 2022 budget. The MIP fund has total expenditures of $6.5 million. 2.65 million of that is Garfield Street. 2.7 are debt service payments. And the other are, again, are projects that have previously been covered and outlined for a total of $6.9 million in spending on the village's infrastructure in 2022. And there are several slides showing what the total street resurfacing and reconstruction has been from the MIP plan. The 2022 remaining accelerated road program. And then the 2021 chart shows the reconstruction and the resurfacing work that has been done in 2021.
On Garfield, we're not just doing, we're doing sewer work on Garfield too? Is that right?
No,
just-
no, that's just resurfacing. I'm sorry, reconstruction.
Reconstruction.
So, tell me why it has to be reconstructed?
George?
I believe back when Garfield was resurfaced.
Yeah, and I was president then.
Right, it was a utilities, some sewer separation and some water main work got done, and then there was a resurface only after that.
Right.
Now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna reconstruct that road in concrete, so.
Oh,
we're upgrading the
okay, you're right,
pavements.
all right, you're right, right,
And
okay,
I think
got it,
It's,
Existing pavers.
okay.
yeah,
So-
there's,
existing
it's
brick
actually a
pavers.
brick paver base of that road. So as part of next year's project, we're gonna be removing all those bricks as part of that
Okay,
road base and then putting back in upgraded concrete surface.
okay. So that's our big project next year,
Yeah.
because
Yep.
that's $2.6 million.
Big project.
Okay,
The next chart just shows a little bit more detail of all the resurfacing work that's planned in 2022. It totals 1.81 lane miles. The
And
motor,
and that's normally referred to, I'm sorry, as the maintenance work.
Right.
If you, go ahead.
okay. The motor fuel tax fund, again, this revenue comes in, it collects in the fund, and then it's transferred over to the MIP fund as needed to fund projects. So there's 1.25 million in the 2022 budget that is scheduled to be transferred to the MIP, and that will go towards part of that 2.65 million for Garfield Street. Again, we talked about the Build Illinois program. 2022 is the last year for that revenue source, so you will see the MFT revenue decreasing next year when that one-time revenue that came in, I think 6 allotments over 3 years ends. There is document showing the debt payments that will be occurring in 2022. Just a reminder that we refunded the 2012 A bonds with the 2021 bonds. And the 2012 principal payment would have been $255,000 this year, whereas the 2021 payment is $185,000. So that's just the savings that we're seeing in the 2022 budget. And each of the remaining 9 payments over the next 9 years also has a decrease in them. And lastly, just wanted to touch on the public safety pensions, the police and firefighters pension. As a reminder, there is a requirement by the state that we need to achieve 90% funding by 2040. The current funding levels as of January 1st, per the actuarial valuations, are listed below. Hinsdale is doing very well in comparison to a lot of the pension funds in Illinois. And just as a comparison, IMRF is one of the best performing. IMRF was at over 100% last year. They're still at 94% this year, so well above that 90% target.
What is the dollar value that's associated with the percentages? Do we know what that is?
We do. There are the actuarial valuation.
Right. Well, actually, I'm
reports
looking for the delta. So to get us to 90% would require X amount of funding. What would that? Do we? And I'm not expecting that right now, but
Yep,
to
I'd
know
be
that
happy
number.
to. Yep, I have those numbers, and I would be happy to send out an email with both of the with the amounts.
That's right. Thank you.
Sure. And then lastly, an update on the public safety pension consolidation. So as a reminder, in 2019, the General Assembly passed legislation regarding the public safety pensions. It's consolidating the more than 650 individual public safety pensions into state-managed funds. The firefighters' pension funds are further ahead than the police pension funds, and they have already started their consolidations. There are multiple tranches, and those started this fall. The Hinsdale Firefighters Pension Fund is scheduled to transfer all of their assets in January of 2022. Then this summer, there will be a new actuarial study that will come from the state that will come up with that minimum required contribution. So we will not have, the village will not have any control over the assumptions used in those actuarial valuations anymore. There is a 5-year transition period, so they're going to smooth those changes over 5 years. The intent is that there will be up to, let's see, 820 million to 2.5 billion in additional earnings by consolidating all of these funds. Hopefully that will occur. It certainly won't occur in the first year. So we're still uncertain what those new minimum required contributions are going to be. They could be greater than what we've seen in the past, and we won't have a lot of control over that. But again, there is a 5-year
So
smoothing
when
on
is,
that.
up till now, we've done our own actuarial studies, right? So when do we stop doing that?
After the transition occurs. So,
So there's no set date?
well, starting in July is when they're going to do the new actuarial valuations.
Right.
So I would recommend that we still do our own this year, and possibly even in the future as a comparison.
Right.
But we're still going to want to do our own this year because
Right.
the state has 9 months after the end of the fiscal year to prepare those valuations. And we're going to need those numbers much sooner than that because we have 6 months to do our annual report and report the unfunded liabilities for GASB 67 and 68.
So after this consolidation occurs, we will get we'll get a number from the state that we have to
Yes.
contribute to the police and fire. We won't have any control over it.
Correct.
But their fiscal is June 30? Is that?
The state's fiscal year? The state's fiscal year is, I don't know that the pension funds are able to operate on their own fiscal year.
Well, I guess what are their fiscal years, the consolidated plan's going to be?
That's an interesting question because all of these municipalities that are consolidating funds have different fiscal years. I mean, there are May 1st fiscal years, July 1st fiscal years, January 1st fiscal years, and I haven't seen any specific guidance on how how that's going to translate to our financial statements if they're not on a calendar year, like we're on a calendar year.
So in the past, we've had the village's actual study, and we've had one by the police department and one by the fire department. They've been competing, right?
Yes.
So we're not going to have that anymore. We're going to get a number from the state, and neither the village nor the police or fire departments will have their own actuarial studies. Is that what I'm hearing?
I wouldn't be surprised if police and fire continue to retain their own actuarial studies, because it's still going to be a minimum calculation
I
of the
see.
90% funding
Okay.
level. Nothing would prevent someone from contributing more than that.
Because I think their studies always assume 100% funding.
Yes.
Right, okay. Okay, got it.
While the police continues to make progress, there are no scheduled dates for the transition of assets for police yet. So we continue to monitor that, and we will keep you posted as more information becomes available. And with that, that concludes all of the information we wanted to cover, and we're happy to review anything else or take any questions that you have.
Going back to the debt, are there any bonds with, higher interest rates that are prepayable?
Yes, there are bonds that are callable, not within the next several months, but I was in touch with our advisors, and we do have the scheduled dates for possible refundings for those.
And what, do they have high interest rates?
They're not high interest rates, but it's just that the interest rates right now are lower. So it's always, doing a calculation to see if it's worth the cost, because refunding is an expensive process. So you want to make sure that you are going to recoup your overall costs.
Yeah, I'm just thinking again about, getting our fund balance down.
Right, I mean, you're saying paying cash to pay these off.
Pay
as
down
opposed
debt,
to-
yeah.
instead of
Yes.
We
Yeah,
have
that-
bonds that are at above market interest rates,
Yeah.
pay those down.
Andrea and I discussed that last week. She was reaching out to go ahead.
Yeah, reach out to the bond advisor, not only just to see if there's anything that we could refund for lower interest rates, but if we could just prepay, pay off in
Right, that's
in
what I was
advance.
asking,
Yes.
because, I know we refinanced something, a few months ago and
Yeah.
saved
Yeah,
some
so
money
some-
there, but I was
there's a
thinking too
different-
about something that we could just, prepay it,
Right,
stop
Right.
paying that higher above market rate.
right.
Yes.
Any other questions, comments?
Great job.
Yeah, it is a great job.
Really great job.
Really is a good job.
And to echo what Kathleen said, again, I just wanted to recognize Allison and Trevor for their significant efforts in getting this together. Allison, with her institutional knowledge, is just a rock in getting information to us. And with Trevor being new, his ability to get up to speed so quickly was outstanding. So
Good to hear.
a huge thanks to them.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep, and again, if you would leave your binders, because we are going to make some updates. We'll
Okay.
put those on a different colored sheet of paper.
And rather than receiving multi-emails, we'll just consolidate the food and beverage, the leak, the water audit, and the pension fund question into one, and then send that out between now and the next meeting. And if there is anything anyone thinks of reflecting upon this meeting that you have additional questions, please feel free to forward them on, and we'll address them.
Okay. So nobody here for citizens petition? Any trustees have anything else they want to add? Nope, no closed session. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call vote?
Trustee Postuma?
Aye.
Trustee Stifler?
Aye.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Trustee Burns?
Aye.
Trustee Benke?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.